Salam Solidaritas. In behalf of the International Indigenous Peoples Movement for Self-Determination, or IPM-SDL, and the Merdeka West Papua Support Network, I thank everyone for joining us for the launch of the Proceedings of the West Papua Study Conference, Bahasa version. The study conference was held in Davao City, Philippines in March 2017. It was a two-day event organized by the International IPM-SDL together with the International League of People's Struggles, or ILPS, and national and regional organizations in the Philippines and Mindanao, namely Sandugo, INPIS Mindanao, and Salugpungan International. Of course, West Papuans were also present in the conference through Dewan Adat Papua. The study conference is an effort to understand the self-determination and liberation struggle of West Papua by looking at its historical context, as well as parallels with people's liberation struggles in other parts of the world. The proceedings, which have been previously published in a booklet, is being launched in Bahasa, Indonesia, in recognition of the need to broaden the reach of the conversation even within Indonesia and our Bahasa-speaking neighbors. A few years have passed since the conference, but its contents and the discourse on West Papua's self-determination remains relevant and deserving of urgent attention and international solidarity. As the Indonesian government attempts to distract us from the massacres, massive displacements, illegal arrests, and other gross human rights violations that continue even amid the pandemic. All the more that we are challenged to fight back by bringing the conversations back to the root cause of the conflict and present the justness of the people's resistance in the many forms that it takes. The conversation on West Papua is also a conversation on the future of a nation post-occupation. This means looking beyond the old societal orders under capitalism, which in the first place was the one to enable occupations of nations. This means looking at alternatives that are not based on the exploitation of resources and oppression of peoples for the sake of profit. We hope to have more conversations on this in our future activities too. Once again, thank you for taking the time to watch our program, and we hope that it helps invite more people to learn about West Papua and support the cause for human rights and social justice, which can be achieved by granting the people their right to self-determination. On November 10, we will also be celebrating the International Indigenous Peoples Heroes Day. We dedicate this event to our freedom fighters in West Papua who are living heroes of the struggle for self-determination and liberation. We also take this opportunity to repeat the call for the immediate release of all political prisoners who were jailed for calling out the brutal occupation of West Papua, including our comrade Victor Yimo. Kami bersama West Papua dalam perjuangan niya untuk penentuan nasib sendiri. Papuan akan merdeka.
Nama saya Martin Manggapro, atau sering dipanggil Mangga saja, atau Martin, itu juga bisa. Saya dari West Papua, asal organisasi saya West Papua National Authority atau WPNA. Saya terlibat dalam perjuangan pembebasan Papua sejak usia 18 tahun, dari tahun 98 hingga sekarang. Jadi ya sekitar 23 tahun ya, begitu. dari usia muda. Pertama-tama atas nama saya, atas nama pribadi, maupun atas nama rakyat bangsa Papua Barat, berterima kasih kepada kolaborasi IPM SDL dengan ILPS serta semua pihak yang telah terlibat dalam melaksanakan konferensi studi tentang penentuan nasib sendiri dan pembebasan Papua Barat pada tanggal 26 sampai 27 Maret 2017 di kota Davao, Filipina. Ini sangat luar biasa menurut saya secara pribadi. Ini luar biasa, terima kasih. Pada saat saya membaca buku ini, saya cukup kaget dan juga kagum. Kagum gembira mengetahui ternyata ada konferensi yang diselenggarakan di Filipina untuk mempelajari penentuan nasib sendiri dan pembebasan Papua Barat pada tahun 2017 yang lalu. Itu kesan saya. Yang kedua, ketika membaca isi buku ini, saya cukup terkesan dan ya cukup tergugah dengan keterbukaan pandangan kritis terhadap penentuan nasib sendiri masyarakat adat internasional, lebih secara spesifik sejarah perjuangan pembebasan Papua Barat. Itu buku ini adalah bukti dokumentasi sikap tegas dari SDL dan ILPS bersolidaritas dengan adat internasional untuk melawan imperialis dan kolonialisme, terlebih khusus juga untuk West Papua. Itu kesan saya tentang buku ini. Yang kedua, terkait dengan narasi sejarah dan perjuangan pembebasan Papua Barat saat ini. Pada umumnya narasi yang disusun dalam buku ini benar pada umumnya itu benar. Tapi ada beberapa hal yang perlu untuk ditinjau dan perlu juga untuk didiskusikan. Misalnya bagian narasi yang menyebutkan bahwa West Papua merupakan bagian integral dari Indonesia sejak merdeka. Kalau narasi ini, jika narasi ini merujuk pada asas utipodetis, maka tentunya narasi ini keliru. Karena asas utipodetis berdasarkan istri hanya berlaku bagi wilayah di Amerika Latin. Spanyol gunakan untuk mengatur wilayah ini, batas wilayah, sehingga mempermudah mereka ketika mereka sudah merdeka. Sedangkan pada kasus West Papua tidak relevan. Selain itu, rakyat West Papua tidak pernah membuat perjanjian maupun sumpah untuk mendirikan negara Indonesia. Berikut itu, OPM bukan sayap militer Emirat atau Dewan Papua. Karena OPM baru dibentuk itu tahun 60. Ketika kita belajar sejarah West Papua, kita akan memahami klaim-klaim sepih Indonesia dan juga peristiwa-peristiwa yang tidak demokratis dalam sejarah integrasi West Papua ke Indonesia. Seperti itu. Misalnya proses New York Agreement. Proses New York Agreement itu tidak demokratis karena pada saat membuat New York Agreement 15 Agustus 1962 itu rakyat Papua sebagai pemilik sah negeri Papua Barat tidak terlibat dalam perjanjian itu. Kemudian Roma Agreement tanggal 30 September 1962 juga tidak melibatkan rakyat Papua. Kemudian dalam proses penentuan pendapat rakyat tahun 1999 itu dilakukan tidak sesuai dengan perjanjian yang mereka buat. New York Agreement itu aturan sesuai praktik internasional itu tidak dilaksanakan. One man one vote itu tidak dilaksanakan. Kemudian kebebasan berkumpul, kebebasan berekspresi, kebebasan menyampaikan pendapat pun itu tidak dilaksanakan seperti itu. Penandatanganan kontrak karya Freeport tahun 67 itu dilakukan antara pemerintah Indonesia dengan Amerika yang menunjukkan kalau Papua sebenarnya dipaksa masuk ke Indonesia yang didukung oleh pemerintah Amerika. Itu mengetahui melihat sejarah West Papua, maka kita akan memahami klaim dan menemukan luar untuk mengakhiri konflik berkepanjangan antara bangsa West Papua dengan Indonesia, negara Indonesia. Indonesia adalah neokolonialisme di Papua Barat. Dalam konteks Papua itu penentuan nasib sendiri, hal yang perlu diketahui adalah apakah rakyat Papua Barat merasa aman, nyaman hidup bersama Indonesia. Apa yang dibutuhkan dan diinginkan oleh rakyat bangsa Papua Barat. Ini yang perlu untuk diketahui. Mayoritas rakyat bangsa Papua Barat itu menginginkan mendirikan negara Papua sendiri. Berdasarkan sejarah, rakyat Papua tahun 61 itu dipersiapkan menjadi sebuah negara sehingga ada Dewan New Guinea atau Dewan Papua yang kemudian mempersiapkan kemerdekaan West Papua sesuai dengan Canberra Agreement. Canberra Agreement ini dibuat oleh 6 bangsa penjajah di Pasifik. Jadi mereka bersepakat bahwa wilayah-wilayah yang diduduki itu dipersiapkan untuk merdeka. Jadi Papua seharusnya merdeka lebih dulu, tahun 70-an, tahun 71. Kemudian wilayah ini yang lain seperti Papua Nugini, Salomon, Vanuatu dan juga Fiji dan juga wilayah-wilayah yang lain. Tapi itu tidak terjadi. Jadi itu menurut saya bahwa penting kita bahwa nyaman, aman tinggal di Indonesia. Tapi saya berani menyatakan bahwa hampir mayoritas, bukan hampir tapi memang mayoritas rakyat Papua menginginkan mendirikan negara sendiri. Tidak mau menjadi mendirikan negara di dalam Indonesia atau tidak mau otonomi khusus atau semacam federasi dari Indonesia seperti itu, tapi mau menjadi sebuah negara sendiri. Begitu. Apa yang dapat orang-orang di luar Papua Barat untuk menyatakan dukungan mereka terhadap Papua Barat. Ya, rakyat Papua Barat menginginkan penentuan nasib sendiri di luar Indonesia, eksternal. Jadi di luar Indonesia, di mana mereka mau untuk mendirikan sebuah negara sendiri. Oleh sebab itu, yang perlu untuk rakyat Papua, orang-orang di luar Papua harus nyatakan, lakukan kepada terhadap Papua Barat itu membantu dalam kampanye dan lobby untuk penentuan nasib sendiri dan pembebasan bangsa Papua Barat. Kemudian yang berikut juga adalah mendorong negara-negara anggota PBB untuk mencabut resolusi PBB 2504 dan mendaftarkan West Papua pada Komisi Demonisasi PBB. Dan juga menggalang dukungan solidaritas yang luas di internasional bagi Papua. Kemudian melakukan advokasi bagi situasi dan kondisi rakyat Papua Barat yang kian memburuk akhir-akhir ini karena penambahan pasukan militer Indonesia ke West Papua untuk berperang melawan tentara pembebasan Papua Barat, juga untuk mengamankan investasi asing di tanah Papua. Kemudian juga melakukan training terhadap aktivis pembebasan dan juga diplomat-diplomat Papua Barat. Dan yang keenam adalah pesan untuk para pendukung dan juga sesama aktivis hak asasi manusia di seluruh dunia, bahwa mari kita bersatu dan kerja bersama dalam jaringan kerja solidaritas kemanusiaan yang luas sebagai kunci untuk membangun dunia baru yang bebas dari kolonialisme dan juga imperialisme. Akhirnya mari kita, meski kita tidak ikut menuai, asalkan kita ikut menabur.
My name is Rakiap, and I'm the international spokesperson for Free West Papua campaign. I'm myself a West Papuan as well, a political refugee, and I'm based in the Netherlands. After reading the book, I really know, as a frontline activist, this is an amazing summary with all the context you need to understand the complex case of West Papua. I think it outlines very clear, where the problem started from a Dutch colony with the UN-backed shame transfer of sovereignty to Indonesia. So it have outlined very well that it wasn't the will of the indigenous peoples of West Papua, that their right of self-determination was hijacked, basically. We know how the West Papuans were denied the right to vote, for example, within the referendum, or even to take part during the controversial, handover of the sovereignty between the Netherlands and Indonesia. So when I read it, I think you won't doubt. It is very clear what went wrong, when it go wrong, and who was part of all those wrongdoing. It were the Netherlands. It were together with Indonesia. It was the United States who played an important role with it, and the UN who facilitated the entire thing. And our struggles are interconnected because our common link is US or Western imperialism. It is, mineral extraction by Western or superpowers and their respective companies who are destroying our ancient lands. So the suffering in the Philippines or in West Papua or in Congo or in Amazon is linked. It's about indigenous rights denied by the corporations of the so-called superpowers or imperialist, empires, such as the British or the US. So what is happening in West Papua and happening against indigenous peoples in Philippines is similar. What the Indonesians in the first place experienced by Dutch colonization is basically happening today by Indonesia to the West Papuans, as has been outlined in the book as well. So it is in the interest of Indonesians themselves to understand that they're, supporting West Papua is standing showing solidarity for the imperialism, which, in the first place colonized Indonesia as well. I think it is very clear that the self-determination for the indigenous people of West Papua means that the indigenous people should control and decide how the future looks like. And to do that, to have that opportunity means that they should have the political, freedom to exercise whatever, direction they wanted to go with their country. So that means an independent state of West Papua, as was promised by the Dutch in the early 60s, outlined in the book as well. It was clear that West Papuans were ready to take control with the first government, the New Guinea Council, in 1961. They were ready. They had their own Papuan Voluntary Corps. They had a flag and national anthem. So they were ready to take control of the land that belongs to them, where they lived for thousands of years. And that is basically, we didn't want something else. It's the same thing that we deserve, which is the right to control our own land. If you look what the West Papuans have realized in the last 15 years, basically since the launch of our campaign, without freedom, with very little resources, with very lack of money, we have created so much change in West Papua. The entire nation have been mobilized. We got the entire Pacific region and a lot of friends, such as your organization, supporting the people of West Papua, highlighting what is happening there. And that is the momentum we created together. And now more than 83 countries, including the UK, the Spanish government, Poland, and the Netherlands, are demanding a human rights mission to West Papua. This is the momentum we created together. So change is possible. So we have shown that it is possible within such a difficult situation. People power make difference. Individual can make difference. And everybody has a voice, and that voice can be a power of change. And just to express what is happening there as human being, when you see that people are being tortured, women are being raped, children are being killed, every human being's heart say this is wrong. To my Indonesian brothers and sisters to say, you have felt how colonization was under the Dutch colony. You have felt how they killed and denied the rights of your people. So how can you look away from what is happening to your brothers and sisters in West Papua, to indigenous peoples of Papua? So my call to them is to speak out against this Indonesian elite who are denying the rights of all the Indonesians as well, by taking huge lands and making deals with the corporations. So it is in their interest as well to speak out what is happening in West Papua. And we can be living as good neighbors, taking care of each other. That will be my call. And for all the other brothers and sisters within other indigenous liberation struggles, is that we stand shoulder to shoulder in this. And when West Papua is free, we're going to make sure that we will be the hub for the global, indigenous liberation movements around the world, to facilitate them to get the right to self-determination. But we believe that standing solidarity is a human responsibility.
So I think this book it's very good in explaining about the theoretical explanation on self-determination, and also giving an example on the moral struggle, and also giving the example on the West Papua struggle, but also giving a perspective on how the national liberation could take in every undeveloped country or in uh, under-colonized country, such as West Papua or Moro, but also have giving a perspective that the national liberation struggle have uh, have a perspective toward democratic revolution and also socialist revolution. The narrative of West Papua history and their current struggle actually uh, is not really popular among the public in Indonesia or in internationally, but their voice, their narrative, and their history actually uh, that is the fact that they have been colonized for more than 50 years under Indonesia colonialisms, and also supported by two big imperialist countries such as United States of America, uh, Australia, and also England. So that happened since the imperialist country founded that the West Papuan people they have big resources on gold and another on mining that the imperialist country need very so much on how to exploit their uh, their uh, their mine their mining. Uh, why is it important that we look at the history of West Papua? Uh, why is it very important? Because when we see that the West Papuan people from the left of Indonesia during 1940 or 1960, we are just looking that the West Papuan people were under colonials of Dutch, and the Indonesian government or the left at the time trying to save the West Papuan, but actually that is story not really truth, not really uh, on the fact, because the West Papuan people actually they are trying to liberate themselves from colonialism of Dutch, and also they don't want to be part of the Indonesia. They are not part of the history of Indonesians political dynamic to become a nation since 1920s or and also 1940s. They have their own history, so we have to see their the West Papuan struggle on on their face and also on their eyes. So when we speak self-determinations and liberation in West Papua, uh, uh, we have to understand that even though we know that the spatial autonomy is also part of the self self-determination, but in this situation, the spatial autonomy is not enough to protect their own life, to protect their own history, to protect their own natural resources, and to fulfill their uh, living life rights, and to fulfill their rights on the democracy and etc. So we have to understand that the special autonomy is have a limit to on growing uh, to growing their democracy and also their prosperity. So that's they realize that the type of self-determination can only fulfill on uh, they call Merdeka. What can the people outside West Papua do to express their support for West Papua? I think uh, in Indonesia context, that's why we built Free WP, Indonesian People Front for West Papua, that we support the West Papuan people to see that the Indonesian people is not the enemy. The enemy of the West Papuan people is the system of the imperialism, colonialism, and also militarism that happened by the that also that run by the Indonesian government. And also in another country, they can speak loud about the what happened every day in West Papua, about the unlawful killing, about the kidnapping, about the exploitations of the resource of the natural resources, that they are still poor even though they have Mount Gold, even though they have many resources on and upper the land or under the land, uh, and we can speak about their history as the government of Indonesia trying to erase their history. We can work together uh, in the same day, in the same language. I mean political language on West Papuan struggle to giving them to put them that they are not walk alone. To see that they have hope by not only from the United Nations but also hope from the international community of activities. And another thing I want to see that on the I want to say that the on West Papuan history, we as the left, me as a left person or part of the left party, actually we have a wrong history on West Papua. It's not only Sukarno, but also the Indonesian Communist Party wrong have a wrong decision on West Papua. Why? Because we never see that there is three groups at the time in 1960. There is one group, small group, who want to be part of Indonesia, yes. But also there is another group, the biggest group, want to be free, but hoping a present or gift from the Dutch colonialism that promised to the West Papuan to give what we call the right for self-determination that written in C24 of the United Nations. They promised to give independence in 1971, but also they forget there is another group. Maybe this group is not big, as big as the other group who hoping for the promise from the Dutch. But this group were also taking the struggle against the Dutch colonies uh, a few years before. So we should see there that even though then this Sukarno and also and mostly all the political party, not only left, not only Indonesia Communist Party and also the right wing party supported uh, to take the operation that we call uh, Operasi Trikora. Uh, they forget that when they're attacking the West Papua people, yeah, on Operasi Mandala or Operasi Trikora, uh, I give a note that Operasi Mandala is led by the, the, the mass killer, General Suharto. Um and when they attacking, they are stopping the internal struggle contradiction among the West Papuan people to the Dutch government. So they forget that they not see I mean the West Papuan people at the time, they not see Sukarno, Indonesia Communist Party, and also the Left Party, other left group, as a liberator. They see them as an invader. So one day when I'm communicate with one of their leader now, they say only Muhammad Hatta is a centrist left who denied to put West Papua to become Indonesia in the preparations committee for Indonesia independence meeting. But one thing I have found it, even though I haven't found the document, there is a little group among the Indonesia Communist Party, uh, led by old Camera before then, Divan Nusantara ID, the chairperson of Indonesia Communist Party in 1960s. Uh, his name is Tan Lingji. Uh, Tan Lingji didn't agree to uh, for the Indonesia Communist Party uh, to taking a part with the government to uh, take Papua to become Indonesia, because he see that the West Papuan people have their own history, they have their own political dynamic on to become a nation. What we understand on what is nation and how nation is grow on Stalin theory, and then Lenin theory. Uh, what we see there is a for category of West Pap of a nation on language. Even though now West Papua speak on in Malaya, but they speak Malayan, East Malayan. We call it East Malayan because because it's a cause of the colonialism, where actually they have 250 language. Mm, they have 250 language. When we talk about same culture, they don't have same culture with Indonesian. When we talk about the movement uh, as a part of a culture uh, category of the nation, actually in the people of West Papua, among in who living uh, in dataran rendah near the sea, near the beach, they don't they, they they rarely have a connection to people who live in highland, such as Wamena. So so if we see in 1960s, there are still still we can say them as an embryo nation. But now, when the Indonesia colonialism and militarism killed uh, many people of the West Papuan in Highland, we can see them. They realize that they are same nation, same people, even though they have 250 ethnic group and also language. So actually, the colonialism completely make uh, and as a part of the uh, actor to driving their embryo nation as a nation. So we see the West Papuan, even though the old category of what Stalin said on nation is not yet fulfilled, but we see that the West Papuan people as a nation now without state, but in the future will be a nation with state. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Colin Woodman and I work for the United Liberation Movement for West Papua, reporting directly to Interim President Benny Wenda. Thank you to the Merdeka Solidarity Network for this opportunity to be part of the relaunch of the record of the 2017 study conference on West Papua, including in a new Bahasa translation. I first came across this book, this one, whilst I was meeting with Merdeka network organisers in the Philippines in 2018. The book was something of a breath of fresh air. It gets straight to the primary issues surrounding the struggle: self-determination, imperialism, indigenous liberation, international solidarity, all without the euphemisms and equivocations that can plague academic and journalistic writing on West Papua elsewhere. There is a desperate need for a historically grounded anti-imperialist analysis of the West Papuan struggle. Some solidarity discourses stop at the level of depoliticised human rights, or make a simple equation that West Papuan equals good and Indonesian equals bad. Much more politically useful, I think, is the line taken by the Merdeka network that the mass of West Papuans and the majority of Indonesians are both oppressed by a settler colonial state that ravages anyone who will stand in the way of its economic interests. That these conference proceedings are being translated into Bahasa is vital, because one of the most important strategic questions facing the movement is the need to build links between progressive Indonesian sectors, West Papuans, and solidarity organisers around the world. I think that all solidarity efforts should be poured into intensifying the links between West Papuans and progressive Indonesian workers, peasants and students, and turning the Indonesian masses away from the brutal ruling class of Indonesia and its occupation of West Papua. And why this is so crucial is because the Indonesian ruling class uses the language of anti-imperialism to justify its colonisation of West Papua, a discourse that has some purchase amongst the Indonesian population given Indonesia's horrific experience of Dutch colonialism and US neo-imperialism. We must be able to tap into this anti-imperialist discourse and help the majority of Indonesians see that true anti-imperialism lies on the side of the West Papuans, not on the side of the Indonesian state. This means we must draw on the progressive anti-imperialist traditions from within Indonesia itself and link them to the West Papuan struggle. But there are some dangers in this approach, dangers I think perhaps one contributor to the original conference proceedings failed to take sufficiently into account. In Mr. Kurniawan Sabah's contribution to the book, he draws an absolute distinction between the non-aligned third worldist Indonesian government of Sukarno and the new order military dictatorship of Suharto. Whilst there was obviously, major differences between the two regimes, from an indigenous West Papuan viewpoint, the invasion and colonisation of their land by Indonesia looked fairly similar under both Sukarno and Suharto. In fact, it was Sukarno who whipped the Indonesian masses into a nationalistic frenzy over West Papua in the first place, and launched military operations to seize it by force. And there's no doubt that vast oppression was used following the full Indonesian takeover of West Papua around 1963, all of which was under Sukarno. So the anti-imperialist tradition of Sukarno was in some respects a hubristic and even bourgeois one, an anti-imperialism of the anti-Dutch Javanese elite, rather than a full-blooded libertary anti-imperialism that we should seek to promote and embrace. We can draw on this tradition, whilst also recognising that it must be surpassed, because the roots of colonial expansion run pretty deep within the Indonesian national and state project. That's pretty much all I had to say, so I hope you enjoy the rest of the programme. Bye.
When I woke up this morning, I checked the news as I usually do. Radio New Zealand reported thousands had been displaced due to fighting in the Merdeka Regency in West Papua over the past week. A West Papuan church minister said people from 15 villages had fled into the jungle in fear for their security. Since 2018, there's also been mass displacement of civilians in 3 other regencies, where fighting has taken place between the West Papuan National Liberation Army and the Indonesian military. The living situation of displaced Papuans is often dire. There have been reports that as many as 400 internally displaced people from the Merdeka Regency have died from a lethal combination of malnutrition, poor sanitation, and preventable medical conditions since 2018. These news stories are a sobering reminder that the topics discussed during the Merdeka Study Conference on West Papua Self-Determination and Liberation are not just for abstract academic purposes. They are absolutely necessary for understanding the situation in West Papua and supporting the West Papuan struggle for human rights and self-determination. I congratulate the Indigenous Peoples Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation for publishing this excellent booklet documenting the conference proceedings and contributions made by the speakers from many different backgrounds. Throughout the contributions, there's a strong focus on understanding the West Papuan situation from a theoretical position, looking at both socialist and international legal understandings of self-determination and Indigenous rights. Although I've previously seen writings that have looked at West Papua from the perspective of international law, I had never before seen the situation discussed from the perspective of socialist theory. This is an important contribution because during the 20th century, progressive anti-imperialists and socialists did not always have a clear analysis of the West Papuan situation. The contribution from Kurniawan Sabah of Indies reminds us that although Sukarno had an admirable record as an anti-imperialist leader against the Dutch, his ultra-nationalist tendencies failed to recognize the rights of the West Papuan people in economics, politics, and culture. This was a terrible mistake that removed possibilities for solidarity and cooperation, and it opened the way for greater oppression following the Suharto coup in 1965. Leonard Mberi's contribution to the booklet reminds us that gross and systematic violations of West Papuans' human rights continue to this day. Media and independent human rights experts are denied access by the Indonesian government, meaning the world is less informed of this dire situation than it should be. The need to build solidarity is another important theme of the Merdeka booklet. I particularly enjoyed Joanna K. Carino's contribution looking at the parallels between the West Papuan and Cordilleran struggles. She demonstrates that regional autonomy initiatives are meaningless unless there's a substantial recognition of Indigenous people's rights to ancestral land and self-determination. Peter Murphy from Australia provides an important reminder of how Western states, ostensibly committed to democracy, have often put the interests of mining firms and geopolitics ahead of human rights when dealing with the West Papua issue. We must ensure our own governments cease supporting repression in Papua. Finally, I will end my review through acknowledging the bravery of West Papuans and their allies throughout Indonesia, who continue to stand for the principles of human rights and Indigenous self-determination. The current treason trial of Papuan activist Victor Yamo and the state harassment of the Indonesian lawyer Veronica Koman demonstrate the tremendous personal costs Papuans and even those in the broader Indonesia face for promoting human rights, an environment where the authorities consider peaceful advocacy on Papua as tantamount to violent rebellion or separatism. Supporting West Papuans should be seen as an important task for anyone around the world who cares about the principles of human rights and social justice. Thank you very much.
manggagawa ay nagsit na sumusuporta sa kapwa ng manggagawa at mamamayan ng West Papua upang kamtin ang tunay na kalayaan at demokrasya sa kanilang bayan.
Ang panghiwaga po ng West Papua ay panghiwaga natin lahat na sinasakop ng mga tuluhan. Sinasalanta ang ating pong mga murang lakas magawa, kanila rin ang ating pong mga lakas yaman o lakas yaman. Kung sino man nakikibaga para sa karapatan, para sa kagalingan ng kanyang kapwa mamamayan, ito pa ang sinasapahan ng mga gawa-gawang kaso.
Ang marami pong West Papuans ang kasuluyang nakakulong o kaya ay nawawala, hindi na nahanap muli ng kanilang mga kasamahan dahil lamang itinaas nila itong bandila na itong